The midsummer sun beat down mercilessly on Jeremiah Blackwood's weathered face as he guided his wagon over the final ridge. At 53, the former cavalry scout's body carried the memories of 2 decades patrolling the Arizona Territory. A bullet scar on his left shoulder from a Comanche raid in '72, a knife wound across his ribs from a saloon brawl in Tombstone, and countless smaller marks that mapped a life lived hard on the frontier. His eyes, still sharp despite the crow's feet that had deepened with each passing year, scanned the valley below where his new homestead waited. The small wooden cabin nestled against the foothills of the Superstition Mountains was exactly as described in the deed he'd purchased in Phoenix 3 days prior, modest but solidly built, with a corral for horses and a small creek running nearby. What the deed hadn't mentioned were the 3 horses already tethered outside or the thin wisp of smoke rising from the stone chimney. "Whoa there," Jeremiah murmured to his team of horses, pulling back gently on the reins as he surveyed the situation. 20 years of frontier living had taught him caution above all else. He reached beside him on the wagon bench, fingers wrapping around the familiar worn grip of his Remington revolver. The weapon had been his constant companion since the war, and the weight of it in his palm brought a certain comfort. With practiced ease, he checked the chambers, all loaded, before slipping it into the holster at his hip. His Winchester rifle remained within easy reach, propped against the seat. "Let's see what kind of welcome awaits us," he said to no one in particular, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of a man who'd spent too many nights drinking whiskey around campfires and shouting orders over gunfire. The wagon creaked and groaned as Jeremiah guided it down the slope toward the cabin, each jolt sending sharp pain through his old war injury, a Confederate bayonet to the thigh at Shiloh that still troubled him when the weather changed. He'd bought this plot of land sight unseen, trusting the word of a land office clerk and the promise of isolation after too many years surrounded by the growing chaos of frontier towns. Phoenix was booming with the railroad's arrival, bringing more settlers, more saloons, more troubles. Jeremiah had seen enough trouble for 2 lifetimes. All he wanted now was peace, a place to raise a few cattle, perhaps grow some crops, and live out his remaining years without having to look over his shoulder for enemies, of which he had accumulated many during his years as a scout, lawman, and occasional bounty hunter. As the wagon drew closer to the cabin, Jeremiah noted details that set his instincts on edge. The 3 horses tethered near the corral were fine specimens, one a magnificent black stallion with a white blaze, another a dappled gray mare, and the third a muscular chestnut with the distinctive markings of Apache breeding techniques. They weren't the scraggly mounts of squatters or desperate outlaws, but well-cared-for animals worth a small fortune on the frontier. More telling was the way they were secured, not with typical white man's knots, but with the distinctive hitching pattern favored by Apache warriors. Jeremiah's pulse quickened. The Apache had largely been forced onto reservations by this time, but rogue bands still roamed the territories, and relations between settlers and natives remained tense following decades of bloody conflict. The cabin door swung open when Jeremiah was still 50 yards away, revealing a silhouette that confirmed his suspicions. A woman emerged, standing tall and proud on the rough-hewn porch. Her long black hair hung in 2 braids adorned with small silver ornaments that caught the sunlight. She wore a curious blend of traditional Apache dress and elements of white settler clothing, a calico blouse over a deerskin skirt decorated with intricate beadwork. Behind her, 2 more figures appeared in the doorway, similarly dressed. Even from this distance, the family resemblance was unmistakable. 3 sisters, Jeremiah guessed, watching as they arranged themselves in a defensive line across the porch, the oldest in the center slightly ahead of the others. None appeared to be openly armed, but Jeremiah knew that meant little. Apache women were as skilled with weapons as their male counterparts. Jeremiah halted the wagon 30 paces from the cabin, just beyond effective range of a thrown knife, but close enough to speak without shouting. He remained seated, hands visible on the reins, making no move toward his weapons despite the tension that hummed in the air between them. The silence stretched for several long moments, broken only by the soft nickering of horses and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. "Afternoon," Jeremiah finally called out, his voice neutral but carrying the natural authority of a man accustomed to command. "Name's Jeremiah Blackwood. According to papers signed and paid for in Phoenix, this here's my property now." He reached slowly into his coat, telegraphing his movements carefully, and withdrew the folded deed. "Got documentation right here says I own this cabin and the surrounding 100 acres. The oldest sister stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful despite the obvious tension in her shoulders. "Papers," she replied, her English accented but clear. "White man's papers mean nothing to the earth that has belonged to our people since before your grandfathers were born." Her dark eyes, sharp as obsidian arrowheads, assessed Jeremiah with the calculating gaze of someone who had learned to measure threats quickly. "My sisters and I have lived in this cabin through 2 winters. We built the corral with our hands. We planted the garden that feeds us." She gestured broadly to the modest plot of vegetables visible behind the cabin. "The man who sold you these papers had no right to this place. He drove our people from the valley with soldiers and disease, then claimed the land as his own." Her voice hardened. "Now you belong to us. This is what the mountains have decided." Jeremiah's weathered face remained impassive, but his mind worked quickly through his options. He'd dealt with the Apache before, both as enemies during his scouting days and as uneasy allies when tracking bandits through the territory. He respected their fighting prowess and their deep connection to the land. And he knew better than most white men the litany of broken promises and outright theft that characterized the government's dealings with native tribes. The land office had assured him the property was legally obtained, the previous owner a rancher who decided to move further west to California. Clearly, there was more to the story. "I paid good money for this land," Jeremiah said evenly, "money I can't afford to lose." He paused, studying the 3 women. "But I didn't come here looking for trouble, especially not with the Apache." The second sister, slightly shorter than the first but with the same proud bearing, stepped forward to stand beside her elder sibling. A jagged scar ran from her left temple to her jawline, the mark of some past violence that had not broken her spirit. "You speak our name with knowledge," she observed, her English more heavily accented than her sister's. "Yet you still come with white man's paper to claim what is not yours to take." Her hand moved to her waist, where Jeremiah now noticed a bone-handled knife sheathed against her hip. "Many who came before you died on this ground. Their bones feed the earth beneath your wagon wheels." There was no threat in her tone, simply a statement of fact delivered with the certainty of someone recounting history. The youngest of the 3 sisters had remained silent until now, partially concealed in the shadow of the doorway. She stepped fully into the light, and Jeremiah was struck by how young she appeared, perhaps no more than 20, compared to her sisters who seemed to be in their 30s. "The white rancher who sold you this place," she said, her English surprisingly crisp and educated, "came with soldiers first. They burned our village in the valley below. Our father and brothers fought and died. Our mother sickened from the white man's disease. We 3 survived and made this place our home when the rancher abandoned it." Her eyes, unlike the hardened gaze of her sisters, held a curious mixture of anger and curiosity. "You are not like the others who have come. You sit and speak instead of reaching for your gun." Jeremiah sighed deeply, removing his wide-brimmed hat and running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. The situation was complicated by history and pain he had no part in creating, but now found himself entangled with nonetheless. His life had taught him that fighting was sometimes necessary, but rarely the wisest first choice. "I've spilled enough blood in my life," he said quietly, "too much of it belonging to your people during years I rode as a scout." He replaced his hat, decision made. "I won't add to that tally today, or any day if I can help it." He set the brake on his wagon and climbed down slowly, favoring his bad leg. Standing on the ground, He cut a formidable figure despite his age, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the measured confidence of a man who had faced death many times and made his peace with it. The eldest sister watched him carefully, her hand hovering near what Jeremiah suspected was a weapon concealed in the folds of her skirt. "You were a scout," she stated, recognition dawning in her eyes. "The one they called Ghost Walker because you moved silent as death through Apache lands." It wasn't a question. Jeremiah nodded once, surprised to hear the name he'd carried among the native tribes. Few white men knew of it. "Your reputation traveled far," she continued. "Our father spoke of a white scout who once returned captive children to our village when others would have killed them. A man who could read sign as well as any Apache." Her expression remained guarded, but something in her posture shifted subtly. "I am Nasha. These are my sisters, Casa and Tallulah." "The children at White River," Jeremiah acknowledged, memory taking him back 15 years to a terrible raid where Apache children had been taken hostage by a renegade cavalry officer seeking revenge for his family's death. Jeremiah had tracked them for days, eventually finding the children and returning them to their people against direct orders. The incident had ended his army career, but saved him something more valuable, the remnants of his conscience. That was a long time ago in a different life. He took a cautious step forward, then another, hands open at his sides. "I didn't know this place had a history. The land office didn't see fit to mention it had been taken by force or that anyone still lived here." Another step, bringing him halfway to the porch. "I'm too old to start again elsewhere, and too stubborn to walk away from land I've paid for. But I've learned there's usually a path that doesn't end with more graves." Casa, the middle sister with the facial scar, exchanged a glance with Nasha that contained volumes of silent communication. "What path do you see, Ghost Walker?" she asked, her tone skeptical but not dismissive. "The white government has given you paper that says this land is yours. Our blood and bones say it belongs to us. Both cannot be true." The challenge hung in the air between them as the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains, painting the landscape in rich gold and amber hues. The moment felt significant, balanced on a knife's edge between conflict and possibility. Jeremiah had navigated such moments before, in war, in peacekeeping, in the complex dance of frontier diplomacy, but never quite like this, never with so personal a stake. "I see a path where both might be true," Jeremiah said finally, the words coming slowly as the idea took shape in his mind. "This land is vast, more than one man needs or can work alone. I came here seeking peace and a place to belong after too many years of wandering." He gestured to the surrounding terrain, the mountains rising majestically to the east, the valley sweeping away to the west, the forest fringing the northern boundary. "Your people understood something mine never have, that the land owns us more than we can ever own it. Maybe there's wisdom in accepting that." He took another step forward, now close enough to see the intricate pattern of beadwork on Nash's garments and the wary hope beginning to form in Tallulah's eyes. "I propose an arrangement. The cabin and land remain as they are, your home and mine together. You continue living as you have been. I add my labor to yours, perhaps bring some cattle, expand the garden. We share the bounty that comes from working the land together." Nasha's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion warring with pragmatism in her expression. "And when more white settlers come, as they always do, when they see Apache women living freely on this land with a white man, what then, Ghost Walker?" The question cut to the heart of the matter, the uncertain future that faced all native peoples as the inexorable tide of Western expansion continued. Jeremiah had seen enough frontier settlements grow into towns to know the pattern. First came solitary homesteaders like himself, then families, then merchants, and eventually the institutions of civilization, with all their prejudices and legal machinery designed to separate natives from their ancestral lands. His proposal was, at best, a temporary solution to a much larger problem. "Then we face them together," Jeremiah answered simply. "I've still got my name and reputation. The deed gives me legal standing with white authorities. You have knowledge of this land I could spend years learning and never match." He glanced at the gathering clouds on the western horizon, a summer storm brewing that would reach them by nightfall. "I don't claim to have answers for all that may come, but I know this. Alone, my claim to this place rests solely on a piece of paper that means nothing if I'm found dead. Alone, your claim rests on possession that will be challenged by others with more guns and fewer scruples than me." Thunder rumbled in the distance, underlining his words. "Together, we might find a way to keep what matters to each of us." Tallulah, the youngest sister, stepped forward suddenly, moving past her siblings with the impulsiveness of youth. "He speaks truth, Nasha," she said in rapid Apache, the syllables flowing like water over stones. "The world is changing around us. Our old ways alone cannot protect us now." She switched back to English, addressing Jeremiah directly. "I learned the white man's tongue and reading from the missionary before he was driven away. I have seen how your people's laws work against mine. If you truly offer partnership instead of domination, that is unusual." She studied his face intently, searching for deception. "Why would you share what your paper says is wholly yours? What do you gain by this arrangement that taking by force would not give you?" Jeremiah considered the question carefully, knowing his answer might determine whether the day ended in bloodshed or something more hopeful. "At my age, a man starts thinking about the ledger of his life, the good weighed against the bad, the debts still unpaid." He absently rubbed his thigh where the old war wound ached. "I've taken plenty in my time. Fought Apache, Comanche, Navajo, sometimes for causes I believed in, sometimes just because those were my orders. Seen too many die on all sides of invisible lines drawn on maps by men who have never set foot on the land they divide." The first fat raindrops began to fall, splattering in the dust around them. "Maybe it's time I tried building something instead of destroying. Maybe sharing this place is a small step toward balancing my ledger." The sudden downpour arrived with dramatic intensity, sheets of rain sweeping across the landscape. Without discussion, all four moved toward the shelter of the cabin porch. Jeremiah found himself standing beneath the rough-hewn overhang beside the three sisters, water dripping from his hat brim, the shared need for shelter momentarily suspending the tension between them. Nasha looked out at Jeremiah's wagon and team, now being drenched by the cloudburst. "Your horses will suffer in this storm," she observed. "Casa, help him bring them to the corral." It wasn't acceptance of his proposal, not yet, but it was a gesture that acknowledged at least the possibility of coexistence. Casa nodded and stepped back into the rain, looking expectantly at Jeremiah. Together, Jeremiah and Casa quickly unhitched the team and led the horses to the shelter of the corral, working in efficient silence punctuated only by the drumming of rain and occasional rumble of thunder. By the time they returned to the porch, both were soaked to the skin. Tallulah had disappeared inside the cabin and now returned with rough cloth towels that she offered to them both. "Come inside," Nasha said, her tone guarded but not hostile. "We will speak more of this proposal while the storm passes." She held Jeremiah's gaze for a long moment. "But understand this. If we agree, you do not become master here. We do not become your servants or your women. We would be equals in all things, or nothing at all. That is our condition." The interior of the cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, a single spacious room with a stone fireplace at one end and partitioned sleeping areas at the other. The furnishings were an intriguing blend of Apache craftsmanship and salvaged white settler items. A heavy oak table surrounded by hand-carved stools, walls adorned with both traditional woven blankets and a frontier clock, cooking implements that included both cast iron pots and native clay vessels. The overall effect spoke of adaptation and resilience rather than surrender or assimilation. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the plank floor and illuminating the room now darkened by the storm clouds outside. The air smelled of sage, smoke, and something savory bubbling in a pot hung over the flames. "You've made this place your own," Jeremiah observed, standing just inside the doorway, reluctant to intrude further without invitation. He removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest, water still dripping from his clothes onto the floor. His eyes took in details that spoke volumes about the sisters' lives: bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, weapons discreetly positioned within easy reach of strategic points in the room, a collection of books on a crude shelf that suggested Tallulah education extended beyond basic literacy. In one corner stood a loom with a half-finished blanket whose geometric patterns told stories he couldn't read but recognized as significant. "It's a good home," he added simply. The words carried weight beyond their simplicity, acknowledgement that what they had built here had value, that their claim to the place went beyond mere legal ownership. Nasha gestured for him to approach the fire. "Sit," she said, indicating one of the stools. "Dry yourself before you bring sickness into our home." There was a practical authority in her manner that reminded Jeremiah of field surgeons he'd known during the war, people accustomed to making life-and-death decisions without hesitation. As he moved toward the offered seat, Casa positioned herself near the window, dividing her attention between the storm outside and the stranger in their midst. Tallulah busied herself with the cooking pot, but Jeremiah noticed how she arranged herself to listen closely to the coming conversation. The sisters moved with the coordinated awareness of people who had survived together through dangerous times, each instinctively covering the other's vulnerabilities. "Your proposal," Nasha began once Jeremiah was seated, her voice measured and deliberate, "is unusual. White men take what they want. They do not share, especially not with Apache." She remained standing, maintaining the subtle advantage of height as she studied him with penetrating intensity. "Why should we believe you would honor such an arrangement when no treaties with your government have ever been kept? Why should we trust the word of Ghost Walker, who once hunted our people for the Bluecoat soldiers?" The questions were direct, challenging, but not rhetorical. She genuinely wanted his answer, even as she remained skeptical of any response he might offer. Outside, lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the cabin's interior with stark white light, followed seconds later by a thunderclap that seemed to shake the very foundations of the structure. The storm had positioned itself directly overhead, as if nature itself were punctuating the gravity of the moment. Jeremiah took a breath, considering his words carefully. "You shouldn't trust my word alone," he acknowledged. "Trust is earned over time, not given in a single conversation." He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped before him. "But consider this. I sit unarmed before you now in your home, completely at your mercy. You could end my life this moment if you chose, and bury my body where none would find it." He nodded toward his holster, which he'd removed and placed by the door upon entering. "That's not the action of a man looking to deceive." Casa turned from the window, rain lashing against the glass pane behind her. "Or it's the action of a clever man who knows he is outnumbered," she countered, though her tone lacked the edge it had held earlier. "Perhaps you only seek to survive this day, to return with others when we are unprepared." The scar on her face seemed more prominent in the firelight, a pale line against her copper skin that spoke of violence survived. "Our father trusted white men once. That trust put him in an unmarked grave." The words were spoken matter-of-factly, without the heat of fresh grief, but with the enduring weight of a formative trauma. Jeremiah recognized in her the particular vigilance of someone who had learned painful lessons about the cost of misplaced trust. "A fair concern," Jeremiah conceded with a slight nod in Casa's direction. "In your position, I'd harbor the same doubts." He straightened on his stool, wincing slightly as his bad leg protested the movement. "I can offer you 3 assurances, for whatever you judge them to be worth. First, practical reality. I'm 53 years old with no family and few friends left in this world. I've no one to bring back, no allies to call upon. Second, necessity. This land represents most of what I own in this world. I need it to survive my remaining years, same as you." He paused, gauging their reactions before continuing. Third, and perhaps worth least to you now but most to me, my word, which I've kept even when it cost me dearly. Ask among the Apache at White River about the scout who returned their children. They'll tell you I'm many things, not all of them good, but not a man who breaks his given word. Tallulah approached from the cooking area, carrying a wooden bowl filled with a fragrant stew that she set on a small table near Jeremiah. Eat, she said simply, offering a carved wooden spoon. No true talk happens with an empty stomach. The gesture, seemingly mundane, carried significant weight in frontier custom. Sharing food was a universal symbol of at least temporary peace. Jeremiah accepted with a grateful nod, recognizing both the hospitality and the test it represented. He took a spoonful of the stew, rich with game meat, corn, and unfamiliar herbs, and ate without hesitation, making a small appreciative sound at the flavor. Tallulah watched him for a moment before turning to her eldest sister. "The storm will last through evening," she observed in Apache. "He has nowhere else to go tonight, whatever we decide." Nash's expression remained inscrutable as she considered the situation from all angles. Finally, she pulled up another stool and sat facing Jeremiah, their knees almost touching in the confined space near the fire. The position placed them at equal height, a subtle but significant adjustment in their dynamic. "Here is what I propose," she said with the quiet authority of one accustomed to making decisions for others. "You will stay this night as our guest. Tomorrow we will show you the boundaries of this land, what grows here, what dangers exist, where the water flows in dry seasons. You will see with your own eyes what we have built." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Then you will tell us what you bring to this partnership besides a piece of paper. What skills do you offer that would make your presence here valuable to us? We have survived without a white man's help until now." The question was direct, even blunt, but entirely reasonable. Jeremiah considered it seriously as he continued eating the excellent stew, using the moment to gather his thoughts. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, rain hammering against the roof and wind whistling through the smallest gaps in the cabin's construction. "I bring 30 years of frontier experience," he began after setting the spoon down. "I can repair and build wagons, furniture, structures. I'm a fair blacksmith when needed. I know cattle and horses, can break the wildest Mustang to saddle given time." He gestured toward his rifle by the door. "I rarely miss what I aim at, and I've fought off everything from rustlers to wolves to Comanche war parties." He paused, considering what might matter most to them specifically. "I understand white men's laws and their weaknesses. I have contacts in Phoenix who can provide information and supplies not easily available to—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "To those whom the settlements treat with suspicion." Casa had moved closer during his explanation, her initial wariness giving way to pragmatic assessment. "You speak of useful skills," she acknowledged, "but we have lived free because we remain separate from white ways. If you bring those ways here, if you draw attention from authorities or settlers, you endanger what we have built." She exchanged a meaningful glance with Nasha. "Our people on the reservation live like prisoners, dependent on government rations that never come as promised. We chose a harder freedom instead. Would your presence here threaten that freedom?" The question cut to the heart of their concern, that any arrangement, however well-intentioned, might ultimately lead to the loss of the independence they had fought so hard to maintain. "A valid fear," Jeremiah acknowledged soberly. "I can't promise my presence would draw no attention. Eventually, someone from town might ride out this way, the tax assessor at minimum." He set his empty bowl aside, the practical reality of frontier bureaucracy unavoidable even in this remote location. "But I can promise this, to anyone who comes, this would be my homestead legally. You three would be presented as my hired help relatives, whatever story best protects your freedom here." He leaned forward, his weathered face earnest in the firelight. "I've seen what the reservations have become. I wouldn't condemn anyone to that existence, least of all those willing to share their home with me when they could have easily left me bleeding in the yard." Tallulah, who had been mostly observing until now, joined the conversation with unexpected directness. "And what of other Apache?" she asked. "Sometimes our cousins come here for shelter when they leave the reservation seeking food or escaping the Indian Agency men. Would you turn them away? Report them to the soldiers?" Her question revealed another dimension of the cabin's significance, not merely a home for the three sisters, but occasionally a sanctuary for others of their tribe, evading the increasingly harsh restrictions of reservation life. It was a dangerous role that could bring severe consequences if discovered by authorities, yet clearly one the sisters had accepted as their responsibility. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm, less violent than before but persistent, promising to continue through the night. Shadows lengthened across the cabin as afternoon surrendered to evening, the fire now the primary source of light in the room. Jeremiah took his time answering Talulah's question, understanding that his response might well determine the final outcome of this unexpected negotiation. "I won't pretend there's a simple answer to that," he said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. "The law would say I should report any Apache off the reservation. My instincts say the law has been used to justify too many injustices already." He met each sister's gaze in turn, his expression somber. "I won't turn away your people if they come in genuine need. I won't betray those who seek shelter here, but I would ask that anything that might bring armed pursuit, raiding, or violence against settlers, not lead back to this place. That protects all of us." The answer seemed to satisfy something in Nasha, who nodded almost imperceptibly before rising to her feet. "It grows late," she announced. "We have spoken enough for one day. Tomorrow we will show you the land, and you will show us what skills you truly possess beyond words." She gestured toward one corner of the cabin. "You may sleep there tonight. Your weapons remain by the door." The statement contained both basic hospitality and a clear message: he was not yet trusted enough to sleep armed in their home. "We will continue our discussion when the sun returns." With that, she moved toward one of the partitioned sleeping areas, effectively concluding the evening's negotiations without a final resolution. Casa followed her after giving Jeremiah one last measuring look, leaving only Talulah still seated by the fire. The youngest sister remained silent for several long moments after her siblings had withdrawn, studying Jeremiah with open curiosity. "The missionary who taught me to read had books about Jesus," she said finally, her voice quiet enough not to carry to the sleeping areas. "He said Jesus taught men to turn the other cheek when struck, to love their enemies, to seek peace." A skeptical smile touched her lips. "Most white men I have met since know these words but live by different rules. They speak of Christian charity while taking what does not belong to them." She poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. "Tomorrow, Ghost Walker, we will see which kind of man you truly are, one who lives by the words he speaks, or one who merely uses them as coins to purchase what he wants." Without waiting for a response, she rose gracefully and followed her sisters, leaving Jeremiah alone with the fire and his thoughts. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the cabin's eastern window, the storm having passed during the night to leave behind a wash-clean world sparkling with raindrops. Jeremiah awoke to find the main room empty, the fire rekindled, and a pot of coffee boiling on the cooking hook. A thoughtful accommodation to white habits that spoke of either hospitality or shrewd diplomacy. He rose stiffly, his war injuries protesting after a night spent on the hard floor, and moved to pour himself a cup. Outside, he could hear the sisters' voices as they tended to the horses and discussed something in rapid Apache that he couldn't quite follow. The domesticity of the moment struck him as surreal given the tension of the previous day. Yet it also offered a glimpse of what coexistence might look like if they reached an agreement. The door swung open, and Nasha entered carrying a bundle of freshly cut wood for the fire. She acknowledged Jeremiah with a nod. "You sleep lightly, like a man used to danger," she observed. "Twice you woke when the wind changed." The comment confirmed what Jeremiah had suspected, that at least one of the sisters had kept watch during the night, not yet ready to fully trust their unexpected guest. Nasha stacked the wood neatly beside the hearth before continuing. We will ride today to see the boundaries of this land. Casa has prepared a horse for you. After, you will show us these skills you claim. There was a practical efficiency to her manner, neither friendly nor hostile, simply focused on the task at hand, determining whether the proposed arrangement could work. Within the hour, all four were mounted and riding from the cabin, following a narrow trail that wound along the creek before climbing into the foothills. Jeremiah rode slightly behind the sisters, noting with professional appreciation their easy command of their horses and the way they positioned themselves to maintain visibility in all directions, habits of people accustomed to watching for threats. The land revealed itself as they traveled. Verdant valleys where wild grasses grew tall enough to hide a mounted rider, densely wooded slopes rich with game trails, natural springs hidden among rock formations, and high vantage points that offered commanding views of the surrounding territory. At each significant location, the sisters stopped to explain its importance, where the best hunting was found in different seasons, which plants offered medicine or food, how the water flowed in drought years versus wet ones. This ridge marks the northern boundary, Nasha explained as they reined in their horses atop a rise overlooking a sweeping panorama of the territory. Beyond lies land claimed by the Morgan family, cattle ranchers who arrived 3 summers ago. They respect this boundary because we have made it costly for their herds to stray onto our grazing. There was a hint of grim satisfaction in her tone that suggested the cost had been direct and effective. She pointed east toward more rugged terrain. That direction, 2 days' ride, lies the reservation where the rest of our band was taken. Sometimes those who can no longer bear the conditions there find their way to us. Her expression darkened. Fewer each season. Disease and hunger weaken even the strongest. Casa guided her dappled mare closer to Jeremiah's mount. This land sustains us because we understand its rhythms, she said, gesturing toward the valleys below. The white rancher who came before you tried to force it to yield what he wanted, cutting trees that protected the soil, overgrazing the meadows, diverting the creek. Her tone held contempt for such short-sighted approaches. The land drove him away in the end. A dry summer, cattle dying, debts mounting. She fixed Jeremiah with a challenging stare. If you seek to impose your will on this place as he did, it will defeat you just as surely, paper deed or no. By midday, they had completed a circuit of the property's main features and returned to a high meadow near the cabin where a small herd of deer grazed, undisturbed by their distant presence. Tallulah dismounted first, leading her horse to a patch of shade beneath a massive oak that must have stood sentinel over the valley for centuries. Now, she said, looking directly at Jeremiah, show us what you can do besides talk. The challenge was clear. Words had been exchanged, land examined, but practical demonstrations would speak louder than any promises or claims. Jeremiah nodded, understanding the test for what it was. He swung down from his saddle, mentally cataloging what he could offer as immediate proof of his usefulness. The corral gate has been dragging for months, Nasha observed casually, though Jeremiah recognized the deliberate nature of the comment. The hinge post has worked loose in the ground. Casa has tried twice to fix it. The statement was both information and challenge, a concrete problem that needed solving and an opportunity to demonstrate practical skill. Casa shot her sister a look that suggested she didn't appreciate the implied criticism of her repair attempts, but she didn't contradict the assessment. All three women watched Jeremiah expectantly, their expressions revealing nothing of what they hoped to see: success that would validate his claims of usefulness, or failure that would justify dismissing his proposed partnership. Back at the cabin, Jeremiah examined the problematic gate with careful attention, noting how the main support post had indeed worked loose in the rain-softened ground, causing the entire structure to sag. "I'll need tools," he said, already formulating his approach. Casa pointed to a crude toolbox near the cabin, watching skeptically as Jeremiah selected what he needed: a shovel, hammer, and several other implements. Working methodically in the afternoon sun, he dug around the base of the post, braced the gate temporarily with rocks and rope, and explained each step as he worked. The post needs to be set deeper and braced properly, he noted, demonstrating how the original construction had been inadequate for the soil conditions. If we add these support brackets I can fashion from some spare metal, it won't work loose again, even in the heaviest rain. The sisters observed his work with varying degrees of interest, Nasha evaluating his methods with practical consideration, Casa noting the techniques she hadn't tried, and Tallulah asking occasional questions that revealed her curiosity about the engineering principles involved. By late afternoon, Jeremiah had not only repaired the gate but reinforced the entire corner of the corral, working with an efficiency born of decades of frontier problem-solving. When he finally stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, the gate swung smoothly on its hinges without the slightest drag or resistance. "That should hold through anything short of a tornado," he said with quiet satisfaction. "Tomorrow I could reinforce the other corners the same way, make sure the whole structure is solid before winter comes." That evening, as shadows lengthened across the yard, Jeremiah demonstrated other skills, reshaping a bent wagon axle at the small forge behind the cabin, identifying game trails and animal signs that even the sisters had overlooked, and showing techniques for preserving meat that would extend their winter stores. Each demonstration was met with careful assessment rather than open approval, but Jeremiah noted the gradual shift in the sisters' demeanor, from outright skepticism to cautious recognition of genuine ability. As twilight deepened into dusk, Nasha finally called an end to the day's evaluation. "We have seen enough," she declared. "We will speak after the evening meal and come to a decision about your proposal." The cabin felt different that night, still tense with the weight of the impending decision, but somehow more relaxed in small ways that suggested shifting dynamics. The sisters spoke more freely around Jeremiah, occasionally lapsing into Apache, but more often using English to include him in practical discussions. The meal was substantial: venison stew enriched with wild onions and herbs from the garden, and served at the table where all four sat together rather than in the more segregated arrangement of the previous evening. When the eating was done and the wooden bowls set aside, Nasha nodded to her sisters, who positioned themselves for what was clearly a formal council. Jeremiah remained seated, recognizing the gravity of the moment and the importance of respecting their process. "We have considered your proposal," Nasha began, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "We have seen your skills with our own eyes and judged them valuable. We have listened to your words and found no obvious deception in them." She glanced at her sisters, receiving confirming nods from each before continuing. "We are willing to accept the arrangement you suggested with conditions." She held up one finger. "First, the deed remains in your name for protection against white authorities, but decisions about this land, what is built, what is hunted, who is welcomed, are made by all four of us together, with no one voice carrying more weight than others." A second finger joined the first. "Second, if danger comes from soldiers, from settlers, from anyone, we face it as one household. Your enemies become ours, our enemies become yours." Casa leaned forward, adding a third condition. "You will teach us everything you know of white ways that might protect us, their laws, their weaknesses, their thinking. In return, we will teach you the ways of this land that have kept us alive." Her expression remained stern, but something in her eyes had softened since the previous day, a willingness to consider Jeremiah as a potential ally rather than merely a threat to be managed. "And you will never bring alcohol onto this land. We have seen what the white man's whiskey does to our people. It has no place here." The condition was firm, absolute, leaving no room for negotiation. Jeremiah nodded his acceptance without hesitation, having seen too often the destruction wrought by liquor in native communities. Tallulah spoke last, her young face solemn in the firelight. "Most important is this: you must understand that we do not become yours in any way beyond partnership on this land. Not as women, not as servants, not as property." Her directness addressed concerns that her sisters had hinted at but not stated so plainly. Many white men believe they can own people as they own land. If that is in your mind, speak it now or leave at first light. The bluntness of her statement hung in the air, challenging Jeremiah to reveal any hidden motivations or expectations. It was the fear that lay beneath all their caution, that what began as a partnership would degrade into the same pattern of domination and submission that characterized so many interactions between whites and natives. Jeremiah met Talulah's gaze steadily, understanding the magnitude of what she was asking. "I came here looking for peace and a place to live out my remaining years," he said quietly. "Not for ownership of people or for anything beyond what I've stated openly. Your conditions are fair, more than fair, and I accept them without reservation." He looked at each sister in turn. "I offer my hand in partnership, not dominion. My word that your home remains your own, with me as an addition to it rather than its master." He extended his hand across the table, palm up, not demanding a handshake in the white man's tradition, but offering a gesture that each could accept or reject according to their own custom. "If you find my word worthy, then let us begin this unusual arrangement and see what can be built from it." Nasha studied his outstretched hand for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate movement, she placed her palm against his. Not quite a handshake, not quite a traditional Apache greeting, but something new that acknowledged both traditions while being bound by neither. "Then it is agreed," she said simply. "From this night forward, this land sustains us all, and we defend it together." Casa and Tallulah each repeated the gesture in turn, their touches brief but significant, a physical sealing of the verbal contract they had negotiated. As the last hand withdrew, a strange sense of something momentous settled over the cabin, as if the very walls were bearing witness to an unusual covenant being formed. "Ghost Walker no more," Nasha declared, using Jeremiah's Apache name one final time. "Now you are simply Jeremiah of this valley, as we are Nasha, Casa, and Tallulah of this valley." She rose from the table, signaling the formal end of the council. "Tomorrow we begin the work of living together. It will not be easy, not for you, not for us. There will be disagreements, misunderstandings, perhaps even anger. But if we remember this night and the words spoken here, perhaps we can find a path none of us could walk alone." With that pronouncement, she moved toward her sleeping area, followed shortly by Casa, leaving Tallulah and Jeremiah still seated at the table. The youngest sister remained silent for several minutes, studying Jeremiah with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing his features or perhaps searching for some sign visible only to her. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father once told me that the future of our people would depend not on fighting the white man's flood, for that is impossible, but on finding ways to navigate its currents without drowning." She traced a pattern on the wooden tabletop with one finger, following the grain of the wood. "Perhaps this arrangement is one such way, small, uncertain, dangerous in its own fashion, but a way forward nonetheless." She rose gracefully, pausing at the edge of the partition that separated the sleeping areas. "Sleep well, Jeremiah of this valley. Tomorrow begins a story none of us could have imagined yesterday." As Jeremiah prepared his bedroll that night, positioning it in what he now understood would be his permanent corner of the cabin, he reflected on the strange turns of fate that had brought him to this moment. He had come seeking isolation, and found instead an unexpected partnership. He had arrived claiming ownership through legal deed, and discovered a deeper connection to the land through those who truly understood its rhythms and requirements. The arrangement they had forged was fragile, unconventional, potentially dangerous for all involved if discovered by authorities or disapproving neighbors. Yet it contained something precious as well, a small defiance against the brutal simplicity of a world determined to separate people into neat categories of victor and vanquished, owner and owned, civilized and savage. Outside, a coyote called into the night, its haunting song echoing across the valley that now belonged to all of them and to none of them. Another answered from the distant hills, the wild voices converging in harmony before fading into silence. Jeremiah listened, recognizing in that brief exchange something that mirrored what had happened within the cabin's walls. Different traditions finding unexpected common ground, separate paths converging, possibilities emerging from what had initially seemed like inevitable conflict. "Now you belong to us," Nasha had declared when he first arrived, the words a challenge and a threat. Tonight, those same words carried a different meaning, not of possession but of connection, not of subjugation, but of acceptance into something larger than individual claim or title. As sleep finally claimed him, Jeremiah's last conscious thought was that, for the first time in more years than he could remember, he had found something that had eluded him through war and peace, through scouting and bounty hunting, through all his solitary wanderings across the ever-changing frontier. He had found, in this most unlikely place and circumstance, a home that might yet become a sanctuary for them all. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with challenges both foreseeable and unexpected, but it was a path they would walk together, four people from worlds in collision, finding in their differences not a reason for enmity but the foundation for something new and perhaps, in its own small way, revolutionary. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.